content and your burgers is in the form of a Happy Meal, all wrapped up nicely with smiles. We think that this is particularly misleading and particularly pernicious because what it does is it implies to every person who buys these foods that they're okay and that they're good for you. We think that not only is this wrong, not only is this misleading, but it means that the nature of the food, which is harmful to these individuals, is provided by way of deception. And we think that as a result of that, these companies bear a particular responsibility to compensate the individuals that they have harmed most egregiously. So, the way this will work is that the burden still is placed upon these individuals to establish that there was a lack of information. And secondly, that these foods were a directly contributing factor in this. And thirdly, that there are direct health harms as a result of these foods that cause their morbid obesity. The compensation will constitute the damages proportionate to the health and social costs of these individuals. We believe that judges regularly do this, and so that's not an issue. This will play out just like cigarette suits, in the sense that the people that are harmed get the compensation which is just, and it acts as an incentive for these companies to change their business practices and to change the kind of foods that they provide in our society. As such, 3 questions. Firstly, why is it that these companies bear a particular responsibility to these individuals? Secondly, how is it that compensation helps these victims? And thirdly, how is it that the process of claims and ultimately payouts of compensation necessarily change the behaviours and the practices of these fast food outlets? Firstly, to why it is the responsibility of these outlets. Firstly, the type of food that they provide is particularly addictive in nature. The high-fat content of these foods not only stimulates neurosenses, which means you get a sense of reward when you have that, which means that you ingrain sort of an emotional dependence upon this food, or at least an emotional enjoyment of this food. But what it also does is it makes your taste buds malleable, which makes you more dependent upon these high-fat contents. So it actually develops both an emotional and physical dependence upon this food. What that means is that it's hard for these individuals, particularly when they don't know and this food is not marketed as being addictive, to realise that they're actually, to some extent, unable to choose to avoid these high-fat foods. Secondly, what we would say in terms of information, we would say that information is either misrepresentative in the sense that McDonald's has these healthy food ranges, which is not actually healthy at all. They're proposed as being healthy seared chicken breast, and they still have as high a fat content as ever. Secondly, what we would say is there has been historically a particular lack of information which has been deprived to these individuals, and that has been a particular cause and a particularly important factor in some of these individuals' cases. Thirdly, what we would say is that these companies target some of the most vulnerable individuals in society. They use exploitative marketing techniques which are designed to target those people who are most reliant upon cost as a deciding factor as to what they will eat and where they will eat. The concept that family meals can be had for under $10 particularly addresses certain lower socioeconomic groups, which is also important, not just because it means that cost is a factor in their decision, because it also means that for the most part, these individuals are unable, because of lower levels of education, to necessarily evaluate the implied harms of these foods. Furthermore, what we'll say is that under the status quo, we can already penalise someone for the kind of negative externalities that they create. We believe that the carbon tax is a clear example of when you directly penalise companies that actually create externalities under the status quo. Second issue, why is it that compensation is particularly beneficial for victims? We believe it's beneficial for 4 reasons. Firstly, because it gives them the direct money that they've needed to pay for medical bills. Secondly, because what it does is it gives them the capacity, financially or just mentally and emotionally, to actually change their situation. It might mean that they have more money to go to the gym. It might mean that they have more money to go and see a specialist to actually help with their condition. We believe that any way that we can empower these individuals to step outside the problem which is threatening their life is a particularly good thing. Thirdly, what we'll say is that we believe it provides some level of emotional closure to this issue, in terms of they understand that it was to some extent the company's responsibility and that it's not directly their fault. Finally, what we would say is that it's particularly important not just to these victims, but also to wider society, because what it does is it raises awareness of the harms of these foods. What we mean here is that it creates a direct causal link between the harms that these fatty foods do provide and obesity, particularly morbid obesity for these individuals. So it directly blames fast food for the harms, but what it also does is it also forces individuals to consider the harms of making these calculuses, to making these choices in the first place. Finally, how it is that this mechanism necessarily changes the behaviour of fast food outlets, why it is that this is beneficial for society. What we would say is that under the status quo, fast food outlets are particularly profit motivated, and that's why they seek to keep their prices down. However, we believe that we can make this change, and that we believe that that is a positive thing because it means that they're more aware of the health of their customers, or at least more open about the health risks to their customers. And the reason that we change this is because you make a direct profit harm to them. The reason is because you force them to change their marketing lines because misinformation now can be claimed against. What you also do is that these ongoing legal cases against individuals are particularly harmful in terms of financially. They do have legal costs associated. And even if they win, they still have to pay out, to some extent, these legal costs. So we think that that creates a financial incentive for these companies to avoid misrepresentation in the first place and to change the composition of their foods. Secondly, what we would say is that it acts as a directly punitive mechanism against these companies who have wronged these individuals. We believe that because we've proven in these instances that the company does have an obligation and responsibility to these individuals because they caused harm to them, we believe that as a result, this company should be punished for the harm that has caused these individuals. Finally, what we would say is that what it does, because of the harms to its image as a whole, is it forces this company to rebrand. It forces this company to reconsider the kind of foods that it does provide. So ultimately what that means is that this company is forced to make healthier choices, or at least to disclose the health risks of their foods in the first place, so at least people aren't convinced that they're eating something relatively healthy when they're not, and that this has a direct harm upon their health. Ultimately, because in this debate we stood to protect the rights of individuals and to recognise the responsibility of these corporations for harming these individuals and putting them in such a devastating position, we are so proud to propose.